Elections matter. Justice is on the ballot. Justice is on the ballot when 1 in 5 mothers has hungry children. Justice is on the ballot when millions of people just lost their jobs, many of whom did not have paid sick leave, paid family leave, many of whom don't have affordable childcare. Justice is on the ballot when we look at the disparities around whose children and where they're living geographically have access to broadband to be able to be educated at home, much less have a laptop. Justice is on the ballot when you look at the disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos who have been afflicted with and have died from COVID-19. Justice is on the ballot when people in our country are struggling like they are right now. So we got to get everybody out to vote. We got to take back the Senate. We got to retain our majority in the House. And we need to win the White House and elect Joe Biden.
Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. My name is Destiny Dixon with Move On, and today we are showing the film Suppress 2020, The Fight to Vote from Brave New Films. We're gonna have a brief chat with the director of Suppress, Robert Greenwald, and a conversation about the film, as well as about voter suppression on both Twitch and Twitter.
And hi, I'm Lilia with Move On. Welcome, Robert. Robert Greenwald is director of Suppress 2020, The Fight to Vote, and president of Brave New Films, a nonprofit film company that he founded after a career in commercial television and film to motivate and educate viewers on the most pressing issues of today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Robert.
My pleasure, thank you.
Awesome. So we're going to kind of just dive into the questions. Why were you interested in creating this film, and have you had any personal experience with voter suppression that made you interested in uplifting this message?
I was interested in doing this film when I, like many of you, I'm sure, started reading and hearing about the horrific voter suppression in Georgia in the 2018 election there. Yeah. And the first, I thought, well, this could be a short video. We do full-length documentaries. We also do short pieces. Thought, well, we'll put together a few of the stories in the press and maybe do a 3 or 4 minute piece to make sure that people are aware suppression is going on. Well, as we began to do the research and as the really amazing team at Brave New Films started reaching out and talking to people and interviewing people and hearing from the groups on the ground in Georgia, it became clear very, very quickly that this was a story that far exceeded 3 or 4 little clips.
Yeah.
In fact, it was a story about patriotism. It was a story about democracy. And it was a story about the horrific impact of racism today in working to try to stop people from voting. Now, film can't do everything, but what it can do, and I talk about this, and I think this is a key part of our work at Brave New Films, what film can do is, and what we try to do, is put a face on policy. And here we were hearing from people who believed in voting, who wanted to vote, who believed in the basic values of their country, and they were being stopped from voting. I thought that was an important story to tell. And most critically, for every single one of us, there is something that everybody can do around voting suppression. So as all those pieces came together, we decided, yes, this was going to be a film, and it was going to be more than 5 minutes, and we were going to interview and give attention to these amazing people from Georgia for the most part, and using that as a kind of case study, if you will, of what was going on all over the country.
I think you answered part of this question. So, but like, what do you hope people gain from watching this film? And I think you talked about how you hope that they are taking actionable steps afterwards. Can you tell us a little bit about those actionable steps that people can take?
So with the film, and with all the films we've done, you know, whether it's this or Out Fox, where one of the first films of Brave New Films that started with the founders of Move On, Wes and Joan and Eli, all of those films, the goal is to motivate people to take action. If any of you see the film and you don't do something, then we have failed, and I don't like to fail. So please take some action. But in all seriousness, there's so much that can be done. And what we try to do, like this screening tonight with the wonderful folks at Move On who are doing such important work, and many of you out there, we provide the tool. The tool is the film, and it's free. It's free to everybody in any venue. So each and every one of you can use it to contact your friends. You can use it on Facebook, on Twitter, on Zoom, on TikTok, any possible place. And then there are a whole list of different kinds of actions. And I think the folks from Move On will be talking about the actions they want people to take. Our goal is to reach the heart through the film, and then to provide the tool and the motivation so that each of you will say, you know what, I can do something, I will do something, and I'm going to do something. I mean, remember, people literally gave their lives for voting. People were murdered because they tried to vote. And we are being asked to do something far less, but something important, to fight for that right today.
Yeah, no, you bring up a really good point. You know, the moment you said, you know, people died and fought for their lives, like Fannie Lou Hamer and so many others that, you know, did these great things, you know, and so like you did these great things and risked their own lives for us. And I think you also bring up a really good point. Like the film is free, and we'll be talking about it tonight. So were there any stories that don't appear on the film, you know, due to time restrictions? We kind of talked about this a little bit prior, that it started as a, you know, small stories, and then they got bigger and bigger, or the Brave New Films team that we don't see in the film?
There were not any stories that we didn't include that we actually filmed. The sad truth was, as the research went on, we were in one of the tasks I gave myself and the team was, could we find a story that would be showing us, explaining, living each one of the different tactics that are used by voting suppression. So when you talk about voting suppression being systemic, well, what does that mean? It means it's not, you know, somebody in a Klan robe hiding behind a screen, as Dr. Anderson says. It's long lines. How long would you wait to vote? You know, I'm from New York. I'm the most impatient person in the world. I don't know how long I would wait. Here, people were waiting 2, 3, 4 hours to vote. Then it was costing them their pay that day. So there's that, there's purging, there's perfect matches. So what we try to do is have somebody tell each of those stories from their personal point of view. So we didn't leave any out that we filmed. Sadly, there were multiple candidates for each one of those incidents. And Stacey Abrams, talks about her heart was broken because of knowing these people and then hearing from them about their suppression and oppression. And she's a great example for all of us, right? She mourned for a while, she suffered for a while, and then, damn it, she went to work and she's continuing to work on this.
And she's working hard. No, she's working hard in Georgia right now for 2022 as well, trying to make sure that everyone has the right to vote, because, we're in a critical moment of, the United States right now. And I was watching the story on Twitter as it's going on, like people in, urban counties and Black and brown communities, sitting for hours and hours not being able to vote because systems are down and they're getting rid of precincts and everything like that. So yeah, no, it was Georgia was crazy, and Georgia's is one of just many states that are having these crazy voter suppression happening. So.
Yeah, and to go off of that, because Stacey Abrams is really like a beacon of hope on like what we can do together to actually like move forward. I wanted to end with like this last question, because I think the most important thing is to keep our eyes like keep hope, because that's something that we don't really have at the moment. So I want to end with this last question. Although this film focuses on the cruel reality of voter suppression, and like I really felt it, like I felt every hit, I felt the rage, I felt the sadness, I felt all the emotions. Like you're right, it hits to the heart, right? What gives you hope for a better future moving forward onto the 2020 election and beyond the 2020 election?
I'm energized and motivated and excited literally every day by the people all around the country doing amazing work, getting out of their comfort zones, taking action. There's that line, democracy is not a spectator sport. And we're seeing it. We're experiencing it. We're living it. People who are refusing to be beaten down, people who are refusing to take no for an answer, people who are phone calling and who are texting and who are doing things, writing letters that they've never done before. That builds a movement, not a moment. And I sincerely believe that we are seeing that happen. Now, movements don't happen quickly, right? Whether it's the civil rights or the women's movement or the labor movement or the peace movement, none of that is instant. But once you get more and more people engaged and you get motivated and you see that they are literally trying to remove something that was won years ago, that is an energizer. And we are seeing victories. People are winning victories on voter suppression and on other issues. And man, we're going to have a lot more fight and a lot more efforts. But I believe and I feel so strongly that possibility is in front of us, assuming every single person does something.
Yeah. No, and I thank you for adding those action items into it, because I think, people are watching this. It's like, no, what can I do? Writing letters, calling people, reminding people, making sure you're doing your part as we're moving into the election season. Before we close out, is there anything else you want to, include, Robert, as people go into watching the film and talk about it tonight?
Yes, the last thing I would say is, social media, we know, has many challenges, many problems. One thing, though, and people tend not to fully understand how important it is. There's a theory, and it's pretty simple. It's called the trusted messenger. What does that mean? It means that you sending to your Facebook group or to your Twitter followers, you are going to have more effect than a big nameless corporation pounding some messaging out. So that if you take the time, use a clip from the film, use a little segment, use the instructions that Move On is going to give you, and you reach out to people in your network and wherever social, whether it's TikTok or Twitter or Facebook, wherever it is, you're going to have an impact. They're going to listen to that. They may not agree always, but they're going to listen because they know you are the trusted messenger. So I hope every one of you will take advantage of that, will use that. And again, there's the film, there's little clips from the film. We're on every single platform. And it's a way to reach beyond those of us who are watching the film tonight. But I want to thank Move On for the work they've done over the years. It's been crucial, it's important. It's wonderful to meet the newer team at Move On, some of whom have just been here for a couple of weeks or days or months. And I look forward to success.
Awesome. Robert, thank you so much for taking the time out of your night to come and chat with us. It was really awesome to get to meet you and have a great conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation tonight and everyone enjoys the film and uses the hashtag #SuppressChat as we'll be chatting along as we watch it. And then everyone chat along with us on Twitch as well and enjoy the show. So thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good night.
You too.
How will I be able to vote without putting my life in danger?
The Black Lives Matter actions make voting more important than ever.
Will this health crisis become a constitutional crisis?
Am I going to be able to vote in November?
We have a historic decision today, striking down a key part of the Voting Rights Act, a civil rights law passed back in 1965.
The Supreme Court essentially said racism is over, and these communities don't need to pre-clear these changes anymore.
This decision leaves virtually unprotected minority voters in communities all over this country.
It let the dogs out. It let these racially discriminatory voting laws to just run wild.
Within hours of the Voting Rights Act being gutted, Texas had a new strict photo ID law. And within days, Alabama announced its own repressive voter ID law.
We are witnessing a tidal wave of voter suppression around the country.
200,000 more people would have voted in Wisconsin if not for their strict voter ID law.
Voter purges have become rampant. Since the 2016 election, states have removed almost 17 million voters nationwide.
You describe Georgia as the epicenter of the current voter suppression battle. What has earned Georgia that distinction?
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state.
Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote!
When do we want it?
Today!
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in. They're in the wood. They're eating the wood away. And you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late. We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I'm a superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomaston, Georgia, Upson County. And I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voter right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they closed the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion.
I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what?
Then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing them too much money.
First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor, on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
No, I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was on a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black side to go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force.
Big problem now.
They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
Got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. The other one was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on Election Day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Showman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
They called the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls means.
With 2 months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the polls we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters. If they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
This is Fulton County. Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history. It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president.
Thousands are purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000. They had no idea they could vote.
Battle is brewing over who's been removed from the voter roll.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics specifically and disproportionately target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
My name is Norman Broderick. I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at a U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. She admitted that yes, they did mess up. It was their fault, but there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late. It's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook, and like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee."
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections, and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, "Oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about." 40 cases not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
I've never seen one.
The line hasn't moved in over an hour.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do.
The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. And then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long, through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. I got to the door, that's when they was checking your ID before you go in, and she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett, and I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady, she came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People are like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'm gonna be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork, had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID.
Wow.
So she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old, and I'm 82.
Yeah, I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, no, you're not registered. And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match, and Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, and all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said, you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about 4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Winter Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drive on campus, within the community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not going to be able to vote myself.
When I was growing up, voting was a thing. It was an event. It's a little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote, and then you get there and the experience is just terrible, and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting you know? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote.
It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait. 5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
Have you decided you can't you can't take it anymore? Are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
All night on Twitter, a trending topic, hashtag stay in line.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up before 6. I picked my son up and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there and the line has tripled. And I was like, oh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give up because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines, that broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called there, the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20-some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
Hi, this is Christine from Gwinnett County Elections.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see. There was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
No, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession, because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
I don't want everybody to vote.
Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Georgia 2018 was a case study of voter suppression. And as we approach the 2020 elections, we're seeing a coordinated effort to suppress, from lawyers, millions of dollars, and potentially the biggest tool of all, the coronavirus.
The coronavirus pandemic is creating concerns ahead of the 2020 election. With no official end in sight to the crisis, there are questions about whether voters will be able to head to the polls to cast their ballot in November.
Out of a large city of Milwaukee, we almost got 600,000 people in the city limits. They only have 5 polling sites open during a pandemic.
In Wisconsin today, thousands waiting for hours, forced to choose between protecting their own health and exercising their right to vote.
This is so wrong. This is just so wrong. Stop playing politics with our lives.
The 2020 primary in Georgia was like the 2018 election all over again.
This is primary day in Georgia. Lines in Atlanta stretching for blocks.
There were people and seniors who had been sitting out waiting to vote for more than 5 hours.
This is wrong. This is America.
I think that mail-in voting is a terrible thing.
If you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
Oh, beautiful for space.
We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We are here to resist an ID law that is undemocratic, unconstitutional, and immoral.
People are demanding democracy. New Mexico now has same-day voter registration. Iowa, Colorado, Nevada, Florida, and Arizona all passed laws restoring voting rights to those formerly incarcerated. Maine has enacted automatic voter registration. Delaware and Virginia enacted early in-person voting. And in response to the coronavirus pandemic, Michigan, Illinois, New Hampshire, and California have all committed to expanding mail-in and absentee voting in the 2020 election.
We belong together. We are all part of the fabric of this country, and we understand what's at stake.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people, it is about America itself.
On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
No one should have to risk their life to vote. And for the politicians that put you in front of a coronavirus firing squad, vote them out.
From sea to shining sea.